You're listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Give God 90 Radio on Demand. My name is Jerry Mitchell, your host for Give God 90. Thank you for spending your most valuable asset with me, and that is your time. If you didn't listen to my last podcast, the live that we did, I titled that one, How Will You Remember? Please, I encourage you to go back and listen to that. A very good friend of mine, Butch Harmon, spent some time with me as we discussed something very, very important, and that is the destruction of our memorials, our monuments, all the things that our culture has created, good and bad on both sides. Our culture has created that, and we need to be able to have those things. We can look back, we can remember, and we can see what's going on and why we should be considering advancing instead of destroying ourselves, because any culture that destroys its own monuments destroys itself. And if that's what the majority of the people in the United States want to do, then I really can't say how bad that is. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't wish that on any culture. Nobody wants to destroy themselves. But it was a very interesting time with Butch and I am so appreciative that he took some of his time to spend discussing that with me. Out of that, I made a statement, and I'm going to get to this in just a second, but somebody sent me a message and said, would you please go over what you said in Genesis chapter 6 and explain what you meant. So I will do that in just a second. First, let me remind you, if you haven't done so, please go to givegod90.com. Spend some time there. You'll see all kinds of good things going on. Don't forget, we're on YouTube. If you choose to subscribe to YouTube and hit the notification, you can listen to us through YouTube. You'll get notified. You can download the Give God 90 app. It's absolutely free. Somebody else paid for it, so you don't have to. It takes less than a minute to download for your Apple or your Android device. It doesn't matter. We're out there for everybody. Or you can listen to us on your favorite podcast outlet. That's probably where you're hearing this now, because when I release these on Mondays, I go into a little more depth, which is why the question was asked, could you please explain Genesis chapter 6 a little more in detail? And what they're referring to is I made the comment about men of renown. In Genesis chapter 6, in verse 4, is where we're introduced to this group of people named the Nephilim. And even when we look at this in the original Hebrew, it doesn't give us a whole lot of information, okay? And I have done I believe it was a podcast before about the Nephilim and how I don't see them as physical giants, okay? They're just, to me, not physical giants. They are people exactly as they are described. And from the Tree of Life version, it reads, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, whenever the sons of God came to the daughters of men and gave birth to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men of renown. Now, the renown part was what I was concentrating on. If you want to go back and search the archives of Give God 90, you can do so. I believe it was actually called The Giants Among Us or something like that, was where I discussed the Nephilim and why I don't think these particular people were large, physically large men. Or women, for that matter. There's a whole lot of history that goes with that I'm not going to take time to go into today. Because the question is, those were mighty men of old, men of renown. And the word for renown here is in Hebrew, the original Hebrew that this was written in by Moses, he uses the word Shem, or name. It doesn't mean that they were large. It doesn't mean they were anything other than they had made a name for themselves. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. They had made a name for themselves, and it was not a good thing. This is a negative context that we're looking at here. Remember, Hebrew is an action language, and what we're looking for when we read in Hebrew are the actions that these people had taken, not necessarily the description of them, but what were they doing? What were they doing? They were mighty men of renown. These were men. I use the example of Audie Murphy, a World War II American veteran who later was a movie star, but he was a little guy. But as a little short person, he physically wasn't big, but he was considered a giant among men. Not because of his stature, but because of what he had done. He was a small person, but he was a war hero. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest honor we can give someone in the United States in the military. He was awarded that because of what he had done battling the Nazis in Germany. And he had been wounded. He had done other things, but he was just such a man who was, he had heart. He had this drive. He had this desire to succeed, not only at a time of war, but also at a time of peace. So he was a giant among men. Now, he didn't make a name for himself. In other words, he didn't set out to do things his way. When he was either at a time of war, or whether he was acting in the movies, whatever he was doing, he wanted everyone around him to succeed. He wanted everyone to be a winner. He wanted to defeat death. He wanted to defeat the Nazi regime, the fascist regime that were the Nazis. And he didn't do it for himself. That sets him apart. Unlike what is described in Genesis 6:4. These people were doing things for themselves. They didn't know, they didn't distinguish, between how bad they were, if we can use that phrase, or they thought they were great. In their eyes, they were wonderful. But in the eyes of the Almighty, they were not. And those are the eyes that we need to be concerned about, right? We see the same thing in Genesis chapter 11. Now, in Genesis chapter 11, if we look at 11 verse 4, they had gone out onto the plains of Shinar. And in verse 4 it says, they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city with a tower whose top reaches into heaven. So let's make a name for ourselves, or else we'll be scattered over the whole land." See, we see that, making a name for ourselves all over again. It's just something, they thought they were doing something great. What they didn't realize is they weren't doing anything great. They were, in fact, just the opposite. And it's kind of a shame, isn't it, that they were like that. It really, really is kind of a shame. When we consider how selfish we can be sometimes, we think about things and it's just amazing that we take things, we consider things, right? And we do it with very little, very, very little concern for our Creator. And that's just a very sad commentary. Very, very sad commentary. We can look at Ezekiel, and in chapter 16, we find the word renown in the King James again. And of course, its name. So let me read this kind of my way. This is my translation. "Your name went forth among the heathen for your beauty. It was perfect. through my comeliness or my holiness, which I had put upon you. But you trusted in your own beauty. You played the harlot because of your name, in verse 15. Again, doing it on your own. Whenever we do things on our own, are we capable of success? Maybe. It depends on what kind of success you're looking for. When we think about doing things on our own, in our minds, it's great. I knew someone many years ago who was an architect, and they came with this set of plans, and they laid this set of plans out in front of someone I was working for who was a contractor. I said, "What do you think of this?" And he looked at it. Now, this gentleman was in his 60s at the time, and he had been in construction, in building homes and renovating homes all of his life. Well, I should say all of his civilian life. He had been a merchant marine. But he looked at that set of plans and he said, "Well, that's nice, but it won't work." And, the architect looked at him and says, "What do you mean it won't work?" He says, "Look, you've got a span here with no support. Your floor will eventually fall through. Your roof has very little structural integrity. You don't have the support you need here. How do you plan on making sure that it's going to meet not only building codes," because he was actually under code, when most architects build things over code. And so we look at these things. He was willing to make a name for himself, but the name he was willing to make wasn't going to suit him because he was going to fail. But he took that information and he went back and he reworked his plans. And he came back about 6 months later, and he had created one of the greatest, strongest home plans there was. He still had the same amount of open space. He just made his structural integrity more strong, I guess is a good way to say it. Now, let's equate that for just a second to our spiritual integrity. If we think about doing things for ourselves, I'm going to accept God because I want to go to heaven when I die. That's doing it for me. Our spiritual integrity is weak at that point. Yes, I said what I said. If all you want to do is believe in God because you want to go to heaven, your spiritual integrity is weak. Oh my. I just caused about 4 pastors to pass out who were listening to this. Yes, I did. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but really, 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 think about it. If all I'm doing it for is me, I'm going to fail. If, on the other hand, think about this, I'm going to place my faith in the promises that my Creator has made. I'm no longer doing it for me. I'm placing my faith in my Creator. Now, because my Creator has kept His promises, I can put my trust there as well. It's no longer about me. It's about my Creator. Now, my spiritual integrity is strong because I'm not doing it for me. I'm not making a name for myself. I'm not trying to do it for anything other than to bring glory to the Father. You see how that works. If I'm doing it for me, it's going to be weak. If I'm doing it for someone else, it's going to be strong. But if I'm doing it for my Creator, who designed me to live that way, then I'm going to have the best spiritual integrity and structurally strong spirit that I can have. The church for years has been promising something that created a weak spiritual integrity. And Billy Graham, for as great as he was, out there evangelizing, don't you want to go to heaven? Don't you want to go to heaven? Don't you? That was his message. Accept God, accept Jesus because you want to go to heaven. He was literally creating weak-spirited Christians. However, if you approach it a different way and say, if you have faith in your Creator and you place your trust in your Creator because He has kept His promises, now you're building something not for a personal gain, but for a communal gain, which means you're going to strengthen that integrity. You're going to make that spirit stronger. Whenever you can do that, now you've changed things. So these men of renown in Genesis 6:11 and Ezekiel, now what we see is we have something to compare to, right? Because these people doing it for themselves, they were weak. They were weak. But the people who do it for others are strong. Now I'm going to say something here you need to pay close attention to. If as a world society, as people who live in the world, would respect the people who serve them more than the people who entertain them, our society and humanity would be much stronger than it is today. We look at these people of renown, these people who have made a name for themselves without the benefit of strong integrity. Without the benefit of strong integrity, now we're looking at them and we're saying, wait a second, you've made a name for yourself. Now, are some of these entertainers, some of these sports people, are they talented? Yes, they are. They're very talented. Do some of them deserve most of what they get? Probably. Not going to argue that point. If you're talented, you're using your talent, that's great. But think about it this way. If your skill or your talent is in entertaining, then entertain. If your skill or your talent is in a particular sport, then play that sport. Chances are your skill or your talent you may be the greatest in the world, but here's the thing. If your skill or your talent stops there, then don't try to use your sports skill to influence somebody's politics or somebody's religion. Entertain. Be a servant to the people. The folks who work on your car or come fix your roof, maybe the folks who pick up your trash, are providing a hugely important service. Hugely important service. The folks who drive trucks from point A to point B to deliver goods, the people who stand in the stores at the checkout counters, the people who stock the shelves overnight, all of these people serve us in a capacity. Each and every one of them are important. Are they out trying to make a name for themselves? No. What they have done is they have said, I am going to have a strong work ethic. I'm going to have strong spiritual integrity. And what I'm going to do is use my skills to benefit people. Am I going to get rich doing that? Probably not. Do you need to be rich to be successful? No. Is it nice? Could be. Hopefully one of these days I'll figure that out. Like I said before, I've gotten really good at being poor. I'd like to try and get really good at being rich. Am I going to get there? I don't know. It just depends. But here's the thing. To be a success, does not necessarily need a bank account to reflect that. There are people I talk to and message all over the world who are successful with what they do. They have very little money. Some of the folks, are lucky to have the equipment that it takes to listen to my podcast. They are blessed and fortunate. Well, I don't know how blessed they are to listen to me, but you know what I mean, right? they're fortunate enough that they can have the equipment or they have access to the equipment to listen to people like me, but at the same time, they go through life serving others. When we think about people who have made a name for themselves, and I'm sure that we can all argue over who's done that the greatest, whether it's a sports figure or an entertainer or a politician, it doesn't matter. When they've made a name for themselves, are they good at what they do? Probably. They probably are very good at what they do. Should they stay in their realm? You know, the folks who, and I'm going to pick on somebody for just a moment. The guys who, and the guys and the gals, I should say, who go to the grocery store for the night shift and they stock shelves overnight. Okay, and I have met a couple of these folks. Those people, do they have a political opinion? Yes. Do they have an opinion about music? Yes. Do they have an opinion about sports? Yes. Are they out there trying to force their opinion on someone else? Probably not. For the most part, if they're in a conversation with somebody and they offer their opinion, but they're not telling you have to think like them. Where our entertainers today and our politicians and our sports figures, they're trying to influence you to think a certain way. We have in the United States, and it's not just in the United States, it's worldwide, we have preachers who have stopped preaching Bible and started preaching social order. Let me say this way. They're not teaching you what the Bible says, how the Bible tells you to live. They are teaching you social order, their concept of how you should live. You know, every one of us, I'm sure, can think of someone either or in the entertainment industry who steps outside of the entertainment industry and they get into politics, they get into religion, they get into other things. We have preachers who have left Bible to tell you shouldn't like that person because they used to do this. You shouldn't like that person because of something else. And the one that I really don't like is you should hate those people because their ancestors that they never had a chance to meet because they weren't born until 100 years after they died, after their ancestors died, they did bad things. You know what? I had ancestors that probably did bad things. I know my family. I know my family history. Not all of it, but I know enough of it to know that not all of them were nice people. Thankfully, we have Ezekiel chapter 18 to tell us that we are not responsible for the sins of our fathers. We are not responsible for the sins of our grandfathers or our great-grandfathers, however far back you go. We are not responsible for what Adam and Eve did in the garden. We simply have to live with the consequences. Here's the thing. Whenever we try to do something for ourselves, we're weak. It's that simple. When we choose to do things for others, and we do those things for others because we, as individuals, have chosen to follow the instructions of our Creator, it glorifies Him, not us. That makes us strong. That means that we now don't rely on what we see as right or wrong or good or bad. We rely on what our Creator says is right or wrong or good or bad. I hope you can see the difference in that. Doing things for ourselves, making our name for ourselves so that we benefit personally, we will always fail. Just like just like the folks that, are there any Nephilim left? I think there are. Yes, just like today, just like then, there are people who want to make a name for themselves. Are the folks who tried to build that tower known as the Tower of Babel, right, in Genesis chapter 11, are they still around? Yeah, they're still around. They're still around. They were dispersed all over the world, but they're still around. Are the people today who want to make a name for themselves because they want to benefit, they want to be rich, they want to make it all on their own. They don't want to be beholden to anybody, including their Creator. Are they going to make it? They may be rich for a while, but it won't last. Just like the Nephilim didn't last because of the flood, right? The folks on the plains of Shinar building the Tower of Babel, that culture didn't last because they were doing it for themselves. They were dispersed all over the world. The folks today are no different. They may start a fortune, but it won't last, and that fortune will be dispersed. When we think about nations who want to make a name for themselves, whether it's the United States or the former Soviet Union, now Russia's the largest country there, China, even a little country like North Korea, when they want to do it for themselves, do they succeed? Maybe for a while, but it won't last. Remember Rome, Greece? You know, at one time, powerful nations. Today, not so much. You know, we look at Greece, and sadly, they're almost paupers because they got greedy. They really did. And it's sad to see that happen to a nation. We think about all of the things throughout history, and all of the times we can look back and see how someone or a group of people tried to do it their own way. Were they semi-successful for a short time? Some were, some weren't. Did it last? No, it didn't last. Now think about the people who did it not for themselves, but for someone else. And I bet we can all look back in history and pick out maybe our favorite people. Maybe they're in the Bible. Maybe they're before that. Maybe they're more recent. There are people I know who will never be worldwide famous, but they're certainly absolutely famous in their community. There was a principal that I had in elementary school, and I think about he could never do today the things that he did then, because the last day of school every year that I was in elementary school, he would stand out and he had a box full of Gideon New Testaments that he would hand out to the children. That can't happen today because it would be, not in the United States, that would be a violation. He couldn't do it. He couldn't share his faith with the students that he was charged with caring, not just for their education, but for their lifestyle. He was doing everything he could to improve the lifestyle of his students. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it for others. He was doing it for the glory of the Almighty, the best he knew how. There's a bunch of us that remember him. But guess what? He'll never be famous in China. That's okay. He doesn't need to be. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it for others. The people who wait on you in restaurants and in stores, they're not trying to make a name for themselves. Would they like to be rich and famous? Probably. Some people have that aspiration. Some people don't. I never expected, never had a desire to be anything other than what I was. And somehow I wound up being listened to all over the world on this little podcast, and on Facebook and on YouTube and some other places. Am I going to be rich and famous in China? No, probably not. But if I can convince you to live the way your Creator designed you to live, you know what? I don't need to be rich and famous in China. I will be happy with whatever the Almighty chooses to give me wherever He puts me. That is the attitude we need. Not because I have it, but because He designed us to live that way. To serve others, to remind them that they have the skills to benefit the people around them. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been a blessing to you. I hope it answers the question of why people who try to make a name for themselves, they may be famous for a short period of time, but it can't last. The fortunes that they had will be dispersed, and it doesn't matter whether it's a single individual or a group of individuals. But here's the good news. Here's the thing. If you don't do it for yourself, if you do it because you want to bring glory to the Almighty, then that's storing up treasures in heaven. That grants you more blessings than you can count. The biblical saying is push down and still overflowing, right? Push down, press down, still overflowing. That's God math, by the way. The more you compress something, the bigger it gets. That in itself, doing it not for yourself, but for somebody else. Can't say it enough. Really can't say it enough. Hope this has been a blessing to you. Until next time, have a wonderful, wonderful